done. On my immediate right, Victoria Papworth, CEO of NatWest Social and Community Capital, so can talk a little bit about the kind of financing angle of this. And I know from seeing people in the audience, that's an area where there's real interest in social enterprises, is how we can get the financial model right to meet the particular needs of businesses that have that social purpose. And concluding the panel, we have Poppy Sinister Thomas, someone who brings a range of experience from business, kind of globally and in the UK, and is now the Conservative Party parliamentary candidate for South Norfolk, and is doing a lot of work in a constituency with a big rural population, and thinking about the role that business needs to play in an area where the public sector could not possibly undertake every function or meet every need. So that's our panel. I'm going to hand over for some opening remarks to Kevin Hollinrake. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Well, my experience of social enterprises started a long way back when I was a small child, actually, and I'm delighted to be Minister for Enterprise, but everything we do as Minister for Enterprise includes social enterprise, which quite rightly, but my childhood was pretty much reflective of that position that I occupy right now. Is that my dad was a local businessman, a local milkman, farmer, so the typical enterprise kind of person, enterprise economy. My mum started just a voluntary youth club in Easingwold, giving us all somewhere to go on a Thursday evening rather than just roaming the streets. And she kind of ended up building a youth club, and then ended up getting involved in an organisation in York called YACRO, York Association for the Care and Rehabilitation of Offenders. So she looked after people coming out of prison, tried to find them somewhere to live and a job. And a lot of these people lived with us, actually, and other people in the good town of Easingwold who were keen to try and help people and give people a second chance. So I had that really kind of mixture, and this probably in this twilight zone between the public and the private sector, if you like, which is what social enterprises are all about. And I think this is indivisible, in my view, business, pure enterprise and social enterprise, because just about every business person I meet wants to do the right thing, and gives back in so many different ways. So it's great that we have one conversation about this rather than a separate conversation about social entrepreneurship from entrepreneurship per se. So, and you've already got this already, because there's 130,000 of these things around the country, which is a huge increase. I think the British Business Bank even today have got 70,000 on their website. So it's been a massive upsurge in social enterprises, and about £24 billion to the economy, and that figure's probably higher too. So great to see that kind of increase. And the typical organisations, when you put this in real terms, the big issues of this world, Eden Project, Jamie's restaurant, the 15 restaurant, Cafe Direct. And in my own little patch of North Yorkshire, I've come from the most glorious part of God's own country of North Yorkshire, but our little shops, our community store in Hewby's little village where we staffs that and expand it. I mean, this shop went out of business, and the local community took it over and now expanded it. Stillington the same, and we're just trying to help with the ploughing at Fadmore, which is a wonderful pub that's been shut for far too long, and the local community trying to set that up. So, we have the Malton Community Interest Company who look after the Yorkshire's food capital of Malton. So, so great to see that blend of purpose and profit working in this space. So we're very keen to support it. And like we do, I say we don't look at this differently from the world of enterprise generally. So there are 3 buckets we try and fill in our department to make it easier for enterprises, social or otherwise, to get started and to grow. And all this stuff's available, whether you're, say, a pure for-profit enterprise or you have a purpose. So access to finance, support and advice, and just removing barriers. Access to finance being the most important one. If you talk to small businesses, small enterprises, the number one issue they have is getting access to finance. Big companies, it's all about regulation. Small companies, access to finance. So lots of programs that we run. The Startup Loans Company, you can apply for 25,000 quid. It doesn't require collateral, just requires a business plan that actually means you'll produce a surplus at some point. Our equity investment programs like SEIS and EIS, all applicable to social enterprises. We have our wonderful amount of funding that goes into our CDFI. See Peter Udale here from Responsible Finance. They do great work in this space. CDFI is Community Development Finance Institutions. We tend to look at finance for enterprises as being through big banks, and that is increasingly not the case. 59% of finance now into enterprises comes from challenger banks and other types of organisation. No longer the high street banks are dominant, which is great news. And we support that kind of lending through the growth guarantee scheme and the community investment, community incentive tax relief, investment tax relief. So as well, these are things that help get money into those kind of organisations. The community ownership fund as well, of course, if people looking to buy a ownership of a particular property, particular organisation, a business organisation, we provide 150 million quid in for that. And with various different grants through Nesta and other things that we support. Indeed, our Angels programs now, we have Clearly So Angels, which are an Angels program investment into social enterprises. So it's by no means a space we're leaving behind. We're trying to provide the support and advice for people to do that through our Help to Grow programs. We've got a Help to Grow website, which you may never have heard of. Please check it out. Lots of advice on the stuff I've been talking about and we'll further talk about in the session today. And finally, breaking down barriers. We're trying to make it much easier for enterprises of all types to get into public sector procurement acts, trying to make it easier for organisations to access some of those procurement opportunities through the public sector. And our message quite clearly to anybody, the business isn't for everybody, enterprise isn't for everybody, social or otherwise, but it is for anybody. So if you want to start one up, we want to help you do that. We're doing great work on things like the Invest in Women's Task Force, which is really pushing forward the number of female-led enterprises, and the Lilac Review, which is doing the same for those who have disabilities or are neurodiverse. So lots of things we're doing across the piece. Really keen to hear your reflections on what we're not doing so we can start doing them.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Arvinder, let's hear from you some opening thoughts.
Thank you. So I want to just broaden the conversation to not just social enterprises, but actually mission-led businesses, because you don't actually have to be a social enterprise to create impact. And of course, many of the B Corps and organizations like that are not necessarily social enterprises, but actually broadening the conversation around businesses actually creating impact, social impact, environmental impact in our society is really what we need to head for. I chair the Future Economy Alliance, as was said in the introduction, and I just want to just highlight the role that mission-led businesses actually have in the UK. So we represent around 5% of all UK businesses currently. You know, it's greater than anybody would think, because the kind of coverage they get is fairly limited in terms of what they do. We create around 4 million jobs. So there are 4 million people employed in these organizations, and about 10% of our GDP comes from these organizations. Reinvesting about £1 billion in profit in the communities that they work in. So if we had all businesses with mission at the heart, and the mission being around protecting our environment, protecting the communities where they work, and creating employment, we could actually see a much larger contribution to the GDP in this country. We would also see wage rises, people getting on average £44 a week more than they do currently, and 22% of social enterprises at the moment work in the most deprived parts of our country. So they work in the communities where business has traditionally failed, and where business finds it, or private sector business finds it difficult to sustain. So those are the kinds of values that mission-led organizations bring currently. If we actually make a concerted effort, and if we as a country and our politicians make their minds up around increasing that, we could actually change the way of the whole economy works in this country, and we could have much greater impact. And at the Future Economy Alliance, we have created 5 key areas where we want to see change, where we would like to see change, and where we are ready to support current government, any future government, on how this could be done. So first one, local power to communities. Second one, people-powered green transition. Services for the public, a fair industrial revolution, and helping more businesses be mission-led. So those are the 5 key priorities that we're putting forward as the things that we should be working on. Because clearly, things are not working as well as they could. They're not working for people in localities. They're not working in terms of the economics of how much people earn. Our country is facing the largest, the highest amount of food poverty that we've ever seen. The large amounts of fuel poverty as a result of price rises and so on. So something needs to change. We need to create a new way of doing things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Arvinda, and broadening that conversation from kind of social enterprises to that broader set of mission-led firms. And Victoria, I'm going to come to you next for your opening remarks. The Minister talked about access to finance being one of the big significant challenges that those social enterprises, mission-led businesses face. How are you at NatWest thinking about overcoming that challenge, and what have you learned about how it needs to be addressed at a policy level?
Yeah, thank you. I should point out that NatWest Social and Community Capital is a separate and independent charity from NatWest. So anyone who's looking for NatWest funding today, I am not your person. But thanks to everyone for coming on your lunch hours, maybe, to come and listen to us talk. So I work for Social and Community Capital. We've been around for 25 years, so we're one of the first kind of UK social investors. And we are so passionate about the value that local charities and social enterprises can bring to their communities, and the value that they bring, and the funding that they need. So we were set up deliberately to give funding to social enterprises who have been rejected by mainstream finance. So kind of, innovative and astonishing in itself that a bank would set up a fund to solve the problems of banks. So for me, if I were thinking about social, or let's throw another term, or community enterprises, those kinds of enterprises which are a product of the communities that they seek to support, and as being embedded in those communities are an absolutely vital place and space for the ongoing reimagining of these places. So if I think about some of the government programs over the years, the New Deal for Communities, Advancing Assets for Communities, and some of the great individual entrepreneurs who've made a huge difference in their specific places, where I think it's worked well is where, where funding has been an option, is where the funder builds a relationship with the enterprise that it's trying to support. So we are so strongly committed to understanding the challenges that those individual entrepreneurs and different enterprises come to us with. So if you as a funder can see yourself as a strategic partner for the enterprises that you're seeking to support, if you can see your strategic aims, the aims that you're trying to create in a fairer and more just society, if you can see your partners being helpful in delivering those rather than you paying them to deliver a transactional service, it seems to me that you're far more likely to build something strong together and something far more likely to be long-lasting. The other thing I wanted to really flag is, for me, social enterprise feels like it needs to be ceded power and agency by the funders that support it. When I look back over the course of my career, and I've done a bunch of different stuff. In my last job, I was a philanthropy advisor. I definitely would have been really interested to see your last event. And I can see the value that those individual donors bring when they make those gifts and grants to individual charities and social enterprises, but they're often so restrictive. When you're making a loan, and for lots of charities and social enterprises, just that question of debt can be really challenging, can be really worrying. If you can work with an organisation, with a lender, to help you understand whether debt is right for you, what kind of debt is right for you. We have a range of different products, and what the best sort of approach to paying back that debt will be. Once you've done that, and we often find ourselves as perhaps the first or the second funder for people who are looking to take out loans. Once you've done that, I would be absolutely delighted to pass you off to the mainstream banks if you have built up that credibility in paying back a debt and were then able to pay back more or to draw down debt in a different way. I would think of that as a real success. So I would say just, like a few final thoughts, so that local enterprises, they are at the heart of the change that communities want to see happen. So if we see in those big challenges that come to our world, like COVID, or even some of the smaller challenges, like loneliness in a particular place, it's not going to be government that solves those challenges. It's going to be locally rooted organisations that have reach and trust and commitment to that place. And what we see, particularly through COVID, is these are not fungible organisations. If your local bakery shuts down, that's sad, but another bakery can probably open up. If a local enterprise shuts down that's built years of trust with the local homeless community, it's not so easy to build that up again.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Victoria. And I guess that's a really good segue to you, Poppy, because the kind of communities that are in the area that you're seeking to represent in South Norfolk are ones that will absolutely have to rely on those sorts of locally rooted businesses and did through the pandemic. So your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, my background is more in the sort of the pure private sector. I was a management consultant for 5 years, working lots with government departments and other parts of the public sector. And before that, worked in energy and shipping. And exactly as you say, a lot of what I recognise now as I'm going around South Norfolk is the ability of social enterprises to defy some of the economic constraints that big business has. So not just in the super rural communities, but in small market towns that I'm working with, the local banks are shutting down, the post office is shutting down, even just the local shops are doing so. And so we've seen some fantastic local enterprises, bookshop in Wymondham, the community's taken over the pub in the small village, exactly that sort of experience that has a huge impact on local people's lives, their experience of being in their community. And I think broader than those communities, I think social enterprises can bring, they bring the agility of the public sector. They're small organisations, can be much more nimble than our slightly lumbering government departments often are, and have that sort of market dynamic of testing what works and in a way that lots of other organisations can't. And they also bring, I think, a clarity of purpose. I think relative to the panel, I'm a bit more dubious about big corporate ESG. Having seen lots of it done well and done badly, I think if you're a big business or small or medium-sized business who's primarily driven by profit, ESG I think is always going to be a nice to have, and it's going to go up and down. It was very fashionable for a while. Economic realities are different now. Lots of big companies are rowing back from that. NatWest potentially not, but I wouldn't want to rest lots of those important activities on big companies for whom they are an extra, a bit of their recruiting activity, a bit of their annual report, but they're never really going to grip that problem. They're not probably going to have the consistency, the intensity of support for those sorts of causes that you would want to have to tackle them properly. And so social enterprises are a great way of getting the best from that sector while having that consistent clarity of purpose that you're just not going to get from lots of other corporates who've rightly got their minds on their core business. And what I would also want to see is for government to be much better able to work with social enterprises, and small businesses of all kinds. Right? I've seen lots of different organisations engaging with government procurement processes, which I know Kevin will know far more about than any of the rest of us. But it's slow, it's painful, it's really hard for small businesses to engage with because it's lots of very, very particular processes. You need to have teams of experts who can manage this over the long term. And so we so often see the domination of the Sercos, the Capitals, who can navigate those processes. And government at all levels is probably not bringing everything that it could from the social enterprise sector as a result of that being a very difficult process. So easier processes, more ability for the government to take the best from that and have much more fluidity between those sectors so that we can harness all those brilliant ideas that are coming out of that world.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Poppy. And Gary, we come to you. You've heard 4 panellists talk about how incredibly important you are and the sort of thing that you do. And so let's get a sense about, give us a sense of your organisation, where it's come from, what it operates like now, and some of the challenges, but also the opportunities that you face.
Thank you. Cheers. It's so great when you're a practitioner, because you don't have to have rafts of notes with data and information on. You can just kind of busk it, which anybody who knows me will know that that's strictly true in the story of my career. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes talking about what we do at Community Shop as a social enterprise, and then a couple of thoughts after that. So I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to talk about two organisations that you've never heard of in your life. So just don't worry if you've never heard of this. But my name's Gary Starr. I'm the executive chairman of Community Shop, which is a social enterprise and a community interest company that we started 10 years ago. And we started that as, I think, a bit of corporate social responsibility that got a bit out of hand. And that's because we were a spin out from a commercial business, which you'll never heard of, called Company Shop. 50 years ago now, a Barnsley businessman spotted that there was an opportunity in surplus stock. So this is stuff that's manufactured by the manufacturing supply chain with a retailer brand on it and doesn't end up getting to the retailers for 1,001 different reasons. That's incredibly problematic in the food industry because the manufacturer owns the product because it hasn't left their factory, but they don't own the brand on the packaging. And Waitrose and Marks and Spencers and Asda and Tesco get ever so miffed if somebody sends their stock out of the back door of a factory and it appears on every car boot sale. So there was an opportunity in a quantum of about 1.6 million tonnes of food for somebody to look at that stock differently. And John, who started Community Shop, who owned a tiny corner shop in a village called Pilly outside Barnsley, said to the manufacturers, you're throwing all that away, it's costing you 76 quid a pallet to put it into landfill. That's a really bad return environmentally. It's a terrible return for you economically because you've invested so much resource in the production of that food. I will buy that food from you at 10 pence in the retail pound. And they went, well, that's a brilliant idea, that will solve all of our problems, but you do know that you better ring up Marks and Spencers and see what they think about it. So John rang Marks and Spencers to see what they think about it. And thus began a negotiation that lasted 22 years. At the end of that negotiation, John opened a network of supermarkets that serve those who work in the food industry, having secured 350 brand agreements to resell that stock in a membership-only store, a little bit like Costco and Macro. It was a tremendous environmental business. It had a tremendous impact economically, paying back 105 million quid to the supply chain for stuff that would have otherwise been lost. But I think if we were absolutely honest, it was motivated by a view that you often hear in the area of Barnsley, where where there's muck, there's brass. So it was absolutely motivated by a passion for entrepreneurship that later became an understanding of the environmental purpose of food loss and waste and all the good things that we could do for that. John called me in 11 years ago and said, we have been giving money and food to organisations in the communities that we're rooted in for the past 2 decades, and the demand is getting more and more, with 1 million people going to food banks. I think we should try and innovate something that adds value to that sector. Would you come and join us? So I joined 2 weeks, 11 years ago. I had no background in food. I've been the chief executive of a homeless charity. I'd worked with a government programme called the Places Change programme back in the 1990s, addressing homelessness, and I've worked in social enterprise for 20 years. And we spent a year looking around the world at what everybody else is doing in this area between food loss and waste and food insecurity. Let me just be clear, they're 2 very separate systemic challenges, and I'm not trying to link the 2 together, but there are systemic challenges in both of those areas. I worked out what we could do to make a unique contribution. Through all that research, we developed Community Shop, which is a relatively simple idea, and I was given a very clear mandate. There's 2 million quid to kick something off, make it make an impact, and don't come back to us for any more money at the end of that, because once that's done, it's gone. So the clock was ticking. We opened the first store in Goldthorpe in South Yorkshire. We've now opened 12 stores. We are opening 3 stores a year. Each store is the same, even though they're in different places, from Kirkdale in Liverpool to the Nunsthorpe estate in Grimsby, to West Norwood, to Eastfield in Scarborough, you will notice they're all in areas of the top 10% of deprivation in the UK. The model is really simple. We run a retail space, which is a convenience store, 800 product lines across every major category, but it's a third of the retail price. We run a community hub that in the last 10 years has delivered 174,000 personal development programs to help every single person who comes through the door address the underlying challenges that they face, and therefore brought them to community shop at the first place. And we pay for those 174,000 personal development programs by selling tins of beans. And we run a community cafe and cookery school where 809,000 kids have eaten free, because kids eat free every day of the year, and we've taught thousands of people the joy of cooking and celebrating food, which we pay for by selling tins of beans in the store. So it's been an interesting journey. We're in a position now where we feel, after having made lots of mistakes and rectifying our course and doing all sorts of innovations, that three-space model works well. I think it works well because last year those 9 stores turned over about 8 million quid. We made just over $1 million at EBIT, even after having paid for all the good stuff that we did. I think they work well for 2 other reasons. I think they're entirely focused on our purpose, which is to build strong individuals and confident communities, free from the dependence on food aid. And luckily, we don't mention selling cheap food anywhere in that mission statement. We say that we exist to build strong individuals and confident communities. I think all of that means that 53% of our members leave membership of Community Shop within a year and move back into mainstream retail. I think that's vitally important for us, because it's really easy when you're driven by a purpose that you stray over into some kind of chronic dependency culture that sustains your own organisational identity for years. So I think one of the reasons that I think the model has worked is that fundamentally it's about progress, change and development. It's about identifying people's assets and helping them build on them. Last year, 1,118 people went back into a full-time job as a result of those personal development programs, and this year 3,000 will. So it's about momentum and change based on a model that can sell tins of beans and support all that momentum and change. I think we are transformed as an organisation because we're a social enterprise, because every member who comes through the doors at Community Shop pays for the good stuff that happens. We are not beholden to a funder giving us magic money to do good things to people. We are beholden to the members who come into that retail store, shop the 800 product lines, receive great customer service and opt into all of the other services because it's what they want to do. And I think that radically reconfigures our relationship with those communities, because they are genuine customers that enable the organisation to grow and thrive. One final thought. We've heard lots about purpose-driven businesses, and I'm really passionate about that. I think, without being too contentious, we are in a challenging time in the UK economy, and particularly in those areas in the top 10% of deprivation. You know, I think last year about 1.6 million people used our existing food bank network, but there were also 7.3 million people in moderate food insecurity, skipping 1 to 2 meals a week and worrying more than 3 times a week about what they were going to eat. That's somebody else's definition of moderate food insecurity, not mine. So the quantum of that group of people, I think, means that on a ladder of food access, from bespoke acquisition at the top, where you get your cheese from a cheesemonger and your wine from your wine merchant, and if you want to slum it, you'll get Fortnum and Masons to deliver you something, right the way through premium branded retailers, mainstream retailers, German discounters, independent discounters, and the 15 different types of food access model that we already have operating in the UK. On that ladder, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for that number of people. There is a great market opportunity for retailers to serve a new demographic through their value range. There's clearly a position for charities who work with that 1.6 million people for whom times have become incredibly tough and they have no cash. But there's a space in the middle of that ladder for innovative social enterprises to bring retail solutions which are embedded in communities and generate jobs and skills. So I'm really proud that the first store that we opened 10 years ago has still got the same staff team. He's still delivering development programs. He's still operating a kitchen and feeding kids, and it's still selling food, even though the membership has turned over often. And we've managed to do that without funding. But I suppose my petition in that ladder is that there is a place for a hybrid solution which includes for-profit business, which includes social enterprise and includes charity. And I think we have to shift the narrative that says when it comes to challenging the UK's biggest problems, particularly in the corporate sector, we bucket all good things which we do in a label that says charity. Because I think we miss a great opportunity to unleash the power of social enterprise and of businesses reconfigured to new markets.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Gary. I can't be the only person in the room thinking that first thing I want to do is come and visit one of your stores.
Not a problem at all. We'll have your basket spend any day of the week.
Okay, let's. I'm going to be cheeky and take the first couple of questions. And Kevin, if it's okay, I want to just come to you first. I imagine you have reflections on a lot of the comments, but in particular, you know, one of the questions is what roles can government play in supporting social enterprises and mission-led businesses? And, you know, there'll be policy levers, but one of the most direct ones is around procurement, right? And there's been action on kind of social value more broadly. But how do you think about getting more social enterprises and mission-led businesses into the supply chains of government at various levels and in different parts of the public sector?
I think the really important thing we do is, and Gary alluded to it, is the trouble with programs funded by government is those programs end, and that creates all kinds of uncertainty at the start and the finish and all that kind of stuff. Ideally, you want things to be sustainable. On a, you know, actually, I don't think profit is a dirty word in any shape or form, but that's reinvested in your purpose or invested in growing your organisation and employing more people. So whichever route you choose in terms of enterprise and entrepreneurship is something we should make easier for people to do business. One of the ways you're doing that is talking about procurement. So we've just legislated now the Procurement Act, and you know, don't be right, I'm quite aware that there's a big difference between legislation and implementation, making this actually work. But one of the new Procurement Acts, what we used to say to companies bidding for public sector contracts, if you're bidding for a 10 million quid contract, you've got to demonstrate you've got professional indemnity insurance for 10 million quid. Well, that's clearly makes life difficult for lots of people who haven't got that. So what we set that aside, for example, and said you only need to put that insurance in place if you win the contract. And another key change, and the same with audit requirements as well, if the audit requirements are not required until you've won a contract, which may be a requirement of the particular public sector contract. But one of the key changes, we used to require that public sector bodies said that they have to go down something called the most economically advantageous tender. We've taken the E out of that, so it's gone from meet to mat. So it's now the most advantageous tender, and you can put different criteria in what you describe as advantageous, which might, for example, lead to procurement being focused on SMEs or indeed social enterprises. So that's some of the changes we put in place. It's some great work, I've got to say, at Cabinet Office. Martin Traynor, Lucy Neville-Rolfe, some really great work. We've got to make sure the practice lives up to the rhetoric on that, of course, because we've tried to change this, make it easier in the past, but really promising changes to procurement in the public sector environment.
Thank you. Arvinder, can I ask you a question? We've heard a little bit about the distinction between a kind of major corporate business that might, you know, have a kind of positive mission, but it's a bit of a kind of sideline to what they do, and maybe that has become an element of the ESG agenda, and how that feels very different to the sort of social enterprises and mission-led businesses you're describing. What role do you see social enterprises and mission-led businesses playing in trying to shift that broader corporate environment that might be populated by, you know, kind of larger firms that might have differing incentives?
Thanks. I'd like to come back to public services, if I may, as
Sure,
well.
of course.
But in terms of the corporate sector, so we have something called the Social Value Act in this country, which was introduced in 2012.
Speak more directly into the mic, sorry.
Unfortunately, although very aspirational and adopted by many, it doesn't have the kind of teeth that it needs in order to create the impact. So I think that failure of, you know, in the last 10 years, of not really requiring all sectors to provide evidence and to demonstrate that they are impacting the economic, environmental and social issues around their businesses, has meant that that act is really not as strong as it could be. And really, there's an opportunity, I think, for us to really strengthen that so that all businesses, whether they're charities, social enterprises, mission-led or for-profit, are required to demonstrate their contribution to environmental, social factors in the businesses they work in. And that way, we could really tip the way we see businesses as just for-profit or not for-profit. And I don't agree that social enterprises themselves are small or niche. They can be big businesses that can add real value to our country. If I can just take the opportunity to talk about public services for a minute, just again, a couple of figures for you. Public bodies now spend 300 billion procuring goods, works and services from outside government every year. Around a third of UK government expenditure is spent through contracting suppliers for these services. Yet in many of the public services, we know that people are not getting what they need on the ground. Half of the 20 largest UK children's care providers, for example, are under private equity ownership, extracting profit often through offshore companies. How can that be right?
Thank you. Yeah, Poppy, go.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in on your point about the Social Value Act, which, as you say, I think is a great example of, Kevin, your point of legislation and policy, but then really testing how it works out in practice. Because in almost all cases that I've seen, you only score those points in your procurement for social value if it is something new that you are promising if you win this contract. And that puts social enterprises at a massive disadvantage because all the good things that you're doing already don't count. And if you're bidding for a big contract, it's actually be better if a year beforehand you cancel all of your good social activity so that you can promise it in the contract and win points for it in that procurement process. And that's a way we could really easily help social enterprises access government procurement more, once we say test out and stress test some of the implementation of those policies.
And look, what we've seen post and immediately post the Social Value Act is a lot of smaller local social enterprises being used as bid candy in those much larger organisations like your Sercos, who just come along and drop those expert local organisations into a bid and into a delivery relationship. So, I 100% agree with Avinda. It's astonishing to me that often the smallest grant or the smallest loan will need to jump through hoops to demonstrate its impact. But for the Social Value Act, there's no requirement to publish, evaluate, or discuss the impacts that you purport to bring. So, an easy switch there, I think. Easy to say for policy change.
I've got loads of things I want to come back to on that, but let's open to questions, because others will spend 20 minutes to make the Social Value Act, which I think some people in this audience would enjoy, but we can't go that niche. So if you've got a question, please just raise your hand, and if you could maybe say name and organisation, that would be great. Yeah, we'll do a question up here.
Hiya, I'm Joanna from Precision Health Technology Accelerator in Birmingham. We're a life sciences SME and we provide crucial lab facilities to other life science SMEs. My question to you, Kevin, is the Life Science Bazaar came out last week and said that London and the country as a whole is very hard to raise capital in for the life science industry. Given the massive public good that it gave during the pandemic, are you monitoring the situation? What policies are you putting in place to protect the life sciences industry?
Excellent. So question there in terms of mission-led businesses about life sciences, the role they play in providing public value and access to finance challenges there. I'm going to take another question from Peter, and then I think there was one more question just behind there, and then we'll take them as a group. So, yeah.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Peter Udall. I'm chairman of Responsible Finance, which is the industry body for community lenders in the UK, and we lend to small businesses, all sorts, all denominations, and our lenders are primarily impact lenders. First of all, access to finance we think is still a huge issue, and it's particularly difficult for social enterprises, which often need some element of blended finance to support those things. We're hugely encouraged by the work that is going on, I think, within the British Business Bank at the moment. There's some really exciting developments there, which we hope will come to fruition over the next 6 months or so. But there still remains an issue of how we support more social enterprise finance, where blended finance is required. We see across the water in the US, we see a Community Reinvestment Act, which has been hugely supportive of lenders like ours who are lending for impact. We don't have something like that in this country. I think we would like to see something like a Fair Banking Act happening here in the UK, or at least some serious intent to look at this to see whether the major banks can support. So a small amount, like if they lent 10% of their bonus pool to small lenders like ours, it would make a huge difference. And at the moment, the level of engagement still isn't high enough. We've recently had money from Lloyds coming into the sector, which is great, and NatWest have put in the personal lending sector, which is good, but it's not widespread and it's not enough. And we would like to see a lot more. I was wondering whether the panel would support such a measure.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. And there was another question just here.
Yes, hi there. Sophie Finn, and I work in corporate affairs. I'm sort of between jobs at the moment. But in terms of really, Poppy, what you were saying around big businesses not being nimble enough and the want, for government basically to help support social enterprises, which obviously do good in terms of creating jobs, local communities, helping us decarbonise, etc. I mean, which other country do we think has a model that works? Is it Sweden? Is it the States? Is it Germany?
We're definitely going to come to that question. I think lots of people have a different thought. So, 3 questions. One, kind of on life sciences, the role they play, mission-led, struggling to access finance. Another on how we can get more blended finance, and in particular, do we need a big symbolic legislative act, kind of Fair Banking Act? And finally, kind of which countries have got the right models that might suggest a way forward on kind of social enterprises. Kevin, let me come to you first, particularly on this question about life sciences as a mission-led sector with mission-led elements to it.
Sure, and life sciences is one of our key success sectors in terms of what's happening in the UK. It tends to be, it's not my direct policy area, but as I understand it, particularly the R&D side of life sciences is very strong in the UK. Lots of international organisations use the UK for the R&D part of it. What we're probably not as good at is commercialising that across the piece. So, and one of the key things we've got to get right that's not right in the UK right now is making sure we get more of the hundreds of billions, in fact trillions of pounds tied up in our pension funds into the productive economy. It's a very risk-averse sector right now. So lots of work going on with the Mansion House reforms to require, well, on a voluntary basis, require those pension companies to invest it in the productive economy, which can go right across the economy, including social enterprises, CDFIs, all those kind of things that money can flow through to, and including in backing companies as they go through the stages. So from the R&D stage to the commercialisation of those product stages. So that's a longer term, it's certainly a longer term programme and project. But very keen to pick that up with you afterwards, if you like, and direct you to the relevant ministry in terms of life sciences. Can I just pick on the point with Peter, the community, which act? We talked about this before in terms of in the US, the banks are required to put a certain proportion of their assets into their version of CDFIs. Something I'm not against. So you said Lloyds have done it on a voluntary basis. We do need to get more money into that sector. We've moved from my days in business early on from a very relationship lend at a local level, which CDFIs provide that kind of relationship. I think 90% of the funding you give are to businesses that have been refused finance. 100, pretty much. 100, there you go. So, sure. So it's a great thing we should be supporting, and we are supporting it through various mechanisms, but we need to do more. One of the other things I would love to see CDFIs get into, I always get into generally, what every other G7 economy has, regional mutual banks, a full banking service sector which supports SMEs, social enterprises and others on that relationship-based approach. And it's targeted at the local areas. So you talk about deprived areas, social deprivation. Instead of just lending money on credit cards and mortgages, it goes through to the productive economy we need a more holistic approach to how we look at our local economies, and that's the mutual banks themselves, like CDFIs, are purpose-driven themselves to try and deliver that kind of outcome.
Victoria, I think you want to jump in on that point.
Yeah, so as a funder, obviously the aim of any investment that we make in a mission-driven organisation is to strengthen its financial ability, but also, and perhaps more importantly, its ability to pursue and deliver its mission. So NatWest, Social and Community Capital, the clue is in the name, although we are most part, we hope, comes back again. But what makes us so different, not just SNCC, but what makes the social lenders so different is that we are so very patient, right, Peter? We're so very patient and so very flexible. And although we do make property purchase loans, you know, and we will take out you know, some security on that property, I mean, we're not going to close someone down. We're not going to foreclose on that property because we are here to help people deliver those services on the back of the loans that we make. So look, some early stage support is key, right? And you know, you spoke about sustainable programs, and when the programs stop, you know, the money stops. Actually, I think there's a great way, well, there's two great ways to stop that being the case. Number one, don't just give money for property purchase, so people have an asset from which they can deliver sustainable community programming. And secondly, have an opportunity to think about how you build the investability of small charities. So there's that gap, isn't there, between being grant ready, and it's not just easy, you can't just take a grant, you need to be able to speak to a funder, build that relationship, you know, develop your impact, and being investment ready. And for some smaller charities, and some charities are always going to be grant dependent, and that is right, you know, we shouldn't be pushing them to take on a loan. But for others, that step between that kind of early stage investment ready support, which Access and other organisations like that provide so well, and then the next step on, that small sub 100k social investment to really allow an enterprise to flex and to grow. That's where I feel there's a real gap at the moment. And if you would like to have a chat afterwards, Kevin, about the great work that the School for Social Entrepreneurs is doing, you know, in its match trading programme, which incentivises trading growth in charities and social enterprises, I'd love to bend your ear about it.
You've got a line, Kevin. Okay, so it's life sciences first, and then you're going to talk about SSE. Arvinder, can I ask you this final question about kind of other countries and international examples? Obviously, the Future Economy Alliance you chair is looking at the UK and where we want to be. Are there other countries where you think they've got it right, or they've got things that we could really learn from in terms of shifting our corporate environment?
I'm not sure that I could point to one country. I think there are lessons to be learned from different countries for different things. For example, banking and the US, for sure. I think we could borrow quite a lot from them, and I would be in favour of us moving to a model where charities and social enterprises are blended in some way, so that actually charities have that long-term sustainable income for some of their activities, but also can do that impact work which cannot be funded through debt or finance. And I think that kind of approach can actually create much more security for those kinds of organizations. I think there are models around environmental work in certainly Northern Europe that we could be looking to learn from as well. But I think, as I say, there's not one country that's cracked this. And just going back to the Social Value Act, we were the first country to do this. We just haven't followed through on it. And that's what we need to do.
Private members bill, though, let's not
There
pat ourselves too much on the back.
we go.
It took someone to come out and do it themselves.
Gary, can I ask you about this question about international comparators? Have you engaged with social supermarkets around the world, around Europe? What do they look like? What role do they play?
We talked to lots of people, and I had emails yesterday from Sweden and Canada and various other people. So, you know, I'll be honest and say that most of that is about the issue of sustainable responses to food insecurity, and it is there's a really complex act of translation when you're talking to people in South America and or Sweden and Vienna and Canada, because the answer is almost always conditioned by the economic and policy framework around that particular issue in that country. So we've done a lot of work with the startup of social enterprises in Sweden that had a very different policy framework for the way in which the state responded to issues of food insecurity. Again, very different in Canada and again in South America. So I think there are some really fascinating models at scale. So the Épicerie Solidaire in France, which is where we nicked the name social supermarket from. Well, we didn't. We nicked it from Christina Holweg at the University of Vienna, but she was doing the research. Although we anglicised it a bit better because it translates as social solidarity store, and even for me that sounded a bit Marxist. So I thought we'll go for social supermarkets. It's a bit more palatable for the UK audience. So I think what's really interesting about that is in those locations where things have really been brought to scale, it has always been a hybrid solution that has been delivered by business and social enterprise together. So I don't think that particularly speaks to the issue of funding. And in a previous life, I had some very interesting and slightly tortuous experience with social investment funders who were happy to speak to people who hadn't been able to be funded by other people. But it was a challenging dynamic. I think the thing that's been really interesting is that in countries where solutions to social problems have been brought to scale, it has been a much more nuanced collaboration of business and social enterprise than just a siloed view of what sector you happen to sit in. And I think the reason for that is not only a difference in the way that the state and business have worked together, but a less exceptionalistic mentality for social enterprise. It's particularly in places where it's a more mainstream understanding. And I know we've got colleagues from School from Social Entrepreneurs and Social Enterprise UK who've been brilliantly supportive of us over the years, but we are terribly guilty of exceptionalism in the social enterprise sector, that we've got it right and other people haven't. I think when you break that and collaborate better across that spectrum of business, you can bring things to scale.
That's great. Poppy, the question was asked to you. So your sense of what you learned from your kind of international work.
Yeah, so likewise, I don't have a go-to other country that I'd say is the perfect example, but I think the point I would add to what's already been made is, our government and industry is unusually centralised, even relative to our peer countries. We're very, very London-based, and where lots of social enterprises are by design place-based, holistic, working across departments, I would imagine that makes us unusually challenged working with those. So the further we can push the government's agenda over the last sort of 10 plus years, devolution, pushing power out to local communities, the more able they will be, and and industry doing the same, to engage with social enterprises who are trying to cut across the silos, trying to work in a much more place-based way.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got probably got a couple more questions, so we'll take one there, hand shot right up, and I'll tell you what, we'll take these three then. So 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, we've only got time for 3, but I promise you can be added onto Kevin's line at the end. Question from over there.
Thank you. I'm the Director of Research and Policy at Social Enterprise UK, Emily Darko. Grew up in South Norfolk, so great to hear from you. I just wanted to add on the country point, we produced some research last year or so called Ending the Monoculture, looking across various countries at the presence of social enterprises and cooperatives in correlation with various variables, and you certainly can see patterns of where there's a higher presence of mission-led organisations, there's also higher productivity and there's outcomes for the economy, that there's a correlation, not necessarily
Very good. You never think you're going to hear National Highways held up as the organisation getting it right, but well done them. That's great. Second question, just there from Josh.
Cheers, Adam. So I'm Josh. I'm policy manager at Power to Change. So I think kind of everyone on the panel has kind of well articulated the role that community businesses and other mission-led organisations can play in the economy. I guess my question is about public funding and the fact that there's quite a large amount of place-based funding going into communities at the moment. My question is, how can we kind of use that more strategically to invest in growing these business models, ones that can endure kind of once that funding has run out, and make that investment go further? And a quick shameless plug, we've got a paper coming out on access to finance at the start of next month, so do look out.
Never shameless. A fellow think tank will always let you do that. Okay, let's, and yes, one more question about that.
Yeah, hi, I'm Chris Baker. I'm director of an organisation called Studios Now. So we help small businesses, entrepreneurs, etc., make their ideas happen. I won't go into any more detail on that. But my question actually isn't about finance, because I agree, the most important thing. But actually, it's just about all the other things that people need to help them make their idea happen around that kind of stuff, and particularly when it comes to young people choosing social enterprise to become a social entrepreneur. The programs that might need to be put in place for that, the access to that, particularly outside of urban areas, particularly outside of certain demographics who find it very easy to have the networks, the access, and the finance, etc., to make their idea happen. How can, any thoughts and ideas really on how to like really lift that up so that more and more of these great social entrepreneurs can actually take that course and actually start making a difference in their community and aren't stopped at any point in that journey?
So I've chaired this appallingly, and we're not going to be able to do justice to that very, very good question. What I'm going to do, just summarise the last three questions. I'm going to give Kevin the chance to answer, but then I'm sure some of our other panellists will be able to stick around and discuss some of those things. So there's three questions for anyone that didn't catch it on the stream. One about kind of machinery of government. Is there something we should change in how government operates? The second one about the kind of range of public funding there is out there, and how can we make some of that work better for social enterprises? And the third one about the support offer there might be out there for social enterprises. How can we make that more accessible? Kevin, your thoughts on those three?
Yeah, thanks. Having just gone through, last year, one machinery of government change, I'm not keen to go through another. It creates inertia more than anything, which is, it's not the impact on me, it's impact on what we're actually doing. So we've got to try and make the best of what we've got. I personally think my department is very joined up now, much better than it was. Department of Business and Trade, lots of our SMEs are exporters, so we're going to have one conversation, not two conversations, two different conversations. So, but I've got to say, all these three questions for me tie into something that Poppy referred to earlier, which is devolution. We are far too centralised as an economy. We're far too centralised in decision making. We see other places like the US and France that they've got much more devolution, much more power devolved to the regions. And these can become the laboratories of innovation, and they should be. So you'd want a really good inspirational mayor, wouldn't you? Picking up on how we can make sure that a social enterprise best supported, how we make sure that place-based money goes into the right places and has the outcome it wants, because you're right. It's 4 billion quid going through various programs around the country. How do you make that so have a permanent impact rather than just a temporary impact? And similar in terms of work at a local level, in terms of how you promote social entrepreneurship. We have something we fund called Growth Hubs. Again, everything we do applies to social enterprise as well as enterprise. So, and big fan of some old Greek bloke who once said that the mind is not a vessel to be filled; it's a fire to be lighted. And the more we have things like, I was just earlier today with Sherry Kutu, who started Founders for Schools. All you people, all the social enterprise, entrepreneurship and enterprise, particularly Gary here, I've got to say, should be going into our schools, talking to young kids about this stuff. And when you do, I volunteer for it. It's a brilliant program. It inspires yourself as well, hopefully inspire the kids. But you talk to primary school kids, and you really light that fire at a young age about this. And that's the way to deliver real change. It's that inspiration amongst our citizens, particularly our young citizens.
Brilliant. We have to wrap things up there, but I want to say three quick thank yous before we do. One, a massive thank you to Social Enterprise UK, our partners for this event, who've helped us curate a fantastic set of speakers and the topics that we've been looking at. Secondly, a massive thank you to you all for giving up your time to come along during the day and listen to this discussion. And finally, if you join me in a round of applause for our speakers, Gary, Arvind, Kevin.